Welcome to Feeling Asian, a podcast where two Asians talk about their feelings. I'm Youngmi Mayer.
And I'm Brian Park.
Oh my god, and so the world turns. I have fucking COVID. Everyone.
Oh, Youngmi.
Which is fucking chaotic COVID, second time around. But you know, that's fine. I feel better today.
Well, I'm glad you're on the mend.
Yeah,
but do you want to tell our listeners how you got COVID or what the rumors
I don't
are
know.
saying?
Oh, the rumors. Well, should I say this because I'm throwing Asians under the bus? It's my favorite hobby. Internalized racism. It's all Asians' fault. COVID start. I'm just kidding. That got really weird and racist. I got I don't know if this is true because I also started going doing exercise classes again for the first time in 2 years. So I kind of feel like maybe that's where I got it because that's like where I'm in a room with people. But I did go to this like Asian mixer where we're supposed to network with all these Asian creatives. And somebody else we know got COVID, she believes, from that mixer. So Brian, this is Brian's racist theory, not mine.
That's not racist theory. All I'm saying, COVID, if you're listening, stop Asian hate, okay?
Stop Asian hate. Stop. Yeah, stop. We're not us. We've been through so much.
Gosh.
Yeah, so that could be it. But then, okay, so here's the thing, though. I'm glad you brought this up, Brian, because I read that after you have COVID, I swear to God, this is like in some sort of research that you're not supposed to exercise. I don't know for how long.
This totally goes against your new exercise kick.
So then I started exercising and I got COVID again. So, you know, that's just science.
Great. So moral of the story, no more health and wellness and stop Asian hate. Let's reiterate that. But any case, Youngmi, I think we should introduce our guests this week because they are fucking amazing and fantastic. And I'm sure all of our listeners are like, stop with the COVID talk. We need to get to the meat of this episode. How's that sound?
We're so fucking over it. Everyone's over COVID. Yeah, let's introduce our guests. I'm so excited to get this conversation started.
Listeners, you are in for an absolute treat this week. Your guest is an incredibly talented multi-hyphenate performer. Listeners, give your ears to Alok.
Hey everyone. Thanks for having me.
Woo! Well, thanks for doing it. Thanks for being here, Alok.
Thank you. We're so excited. It's so okay. So this is the thing. You're like doing so much that, you know, you're like a published writer, you're a poet, you're like doing TV, you're doing actor,
everything.
You're in this docu-series with Jonathan Van Ness. So I think people but people also fail to realize that you are a amazing stand-up comedian who headlined the New York Comedy Festival last year, and you're headlining Just for Laughs this year, the biggest stand-up comedy festival in the world. How's that going?
Yeah, I think that every time that people don't laugh at my jokes, I just think it's because they forgot I was a comedian, you know? That's how I justify it. I rationalize it. I just got this interview question the other day that was like, what's your comedic style considering that everyone takes you so seriously? And I'm like, well, that question itself is the comedy. Because it's just strange to me. I've spent my entire life saying, hey, everyone, I'm non-binary, which means you can be both and then people don't understand that you can both talk about serious shit and be funny as hell. Like, they have this idea in their head that being flippant is somehow opposed to being rigorous. And I actually think that they're braided with one another.
I agree so hard. Yeah.
Yeah, so... Sorry, go on, Youngmi.
Oh, somebody just said, like, my friend Lucy, who's a comedian, was like, oh, there's this quote. She quoted somebody famous, and I forgot who they were, but they said, like, talking about serious stuff in a funny way is just being serious but funny. It's just like, why can't you talk about serious stuff in a funny way? Why not laugh?
And I think especially for those of us from marginalized backgrounds, people are talking about us in comedy so much And so even if I was to ever like think about a world in which Asian Americans were chillin', like I call my apartment the Center for Lazy Immigrants, and my dream for Asian Americans is taking a nap. If I wanted that world where Asians could nap, then I have to be a comedian, because that's one of the primary places where meaning about our communities gets created and disseminated, where tropes and stereotypes about us get produced. So it's weird that comedy is not actually seen as a legitimate form of political discourse when it is. And I've noticed, you know, doing more comedic venues is like, people will take the intellectual and political quality of my work more seriously if it's a poem or if it's a book. But I'm like, when I'm constructing a joke, it's the exact same due diligence, the same political commitments. It just actually reaches more people.
Wow. As a comedian, I love this insight. But there's so much truth to that. And I've always, I've questioned the same, because on the totem pole of, I'd say, the creative arts, like comedy sort of is on the bottom, and it doesn't have the same reverence that like poetry does, or being a writer or an actor. And yet, to your point, so much of, like, I guess in the American zeitgeist, I think so many people absorb their, like, whether they become informed on politics through the conduit of comedy, whether it's through like Stephen Colbert or Bill Maher or John Oliver,
racist tropes of Asian characters in media that have been played by white people in comedic acts for decades.
Right.
Wait, can I say something though? I also feel like kind of on what Brian was saying, other people do actually consume serious content through comedy, but I think that people in this like sort of cishet world, when they're viewing comedians like you, and when they're talking about things that maybe make them uncomfortable, then they're like afraid to laugh, and then you're like, no, I'm taking this,
you're allowed to laugh at me right now.
I'm trying to teach you.
Hey everyone, you're not allowed to laugh at me when I'm walking down the street, but here is a socially permissible zone where you are in fact allowed to laugh at me.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think that's what I think that's what held me back from doing comedy for so long. Is that I was like, are you laughing at me or with me? That perennial crisis.
Yeah.
As someone who's been ridiculed and humiliated my entire life, at first it was kind of traumatizing to have an entire group laugh at me. It's like, how is this different than like my high school cafeteria,
Oh, absolutely.
But then I started to realize that actually that means I'm really good at telling a joke because I've been the butt of it my entire life. So I've been doing a deep artistic residency in comedy as the butt of the joke, as the bottom of comedy for about 30 years. And I've got a lot of chops to bring back. And then now, I think the second thing, I think it's like also the way that we're taught comedy is making other people laugh. And I don't think that's what I'm doing. This is the most immigrant thing I'm about to say, but I grew up with brown men who laughed at their own jokes. And I grew up being taught comedy is not just about making other people laugh, it's also about making what makes you laugh. So sometimes I'll literally be on stage. Wow, I'm so excited by this, I ripped off my headphone. It's that kind of day. I'll be on stage and I'll improvise a new joke, and I'll just stop and I'll just start. I'm like, you guys, that was really freaking good. That was so funny. And I'm laughing, and it brings me joy. And so what I also really like is that as a queer and trans and racialized person, I'm able to interrupt the standard conventions of comedy and actually do something different with it. And what I'm trying to do is actually create public joy for my community, which has to deal with so much stress in the world. Like, how can I create an incubation center for an hour where it's like I'm like freaking Nurse Joy out here, allowing the girls to really recharge.
I love that. Also, my favorite thing that I like to fucking say when people give me a hard time about me making jokes about serious issues and my own trauma is, if I don't fucking laugh about this, I'm gonna fucking kill myself. I mean, I'm not joking. I am joking, but So like, how dare you fucking tell me how I'm allowed to process shit? This shit was fucking hard, and I got through it while laughing. And I kudos to you for doing that as well. Kudos.
Well, Alok, before we I love that. Thank you for Yeah, that was great. So insightful. But before we, ask you how you're feeling at this very moment, Youngmi, how are you feeling?
Well, I got COVID. Sorry. I got COVID. I was like, it's been like a rough 2 weeks. Because I guess this week is when I had symptoms. But last week, I've been going through this rough patch in therapy where I've just been like, I don't know why, but we've tapped into this fucking deep shit that like, and this is weird for me because I love crying in therapy and being like touching all this like traumatic stuff, but this has been rough for me where there have been multiple points during my session where I'm like, I don't want to fucking think about this right now. This is so fucking hard. And so these last 2 weeks I've been going through this like fucking really emotional stuff in therapy, and it's weird because it's like I think doing therapeutic work around your emotions is kind of like you're doing like physical therapy, like you're working on your broken leg or whatever, but nobody in society makes room for that. Do you know what I mean? It's like you can't be like, I had a hard time in therapy, I can't go to work this week. You can't say that. You just have to like get on the subway and like get your little fucking coffee and do your little life. And that's like really interesting to me because I'm dealing with trauma that I experienced as a fucking teen, over 20 years ago right now. And so on top of the fucking COVID, I'm doing that. And I also feel like maybe it's related, like maybe I was dealing with that emotional trauma and it made my immune system sort of vulnerable. That's just, I mean, I think that's like, I don't know if that's like science, but like it makes sense, right? Like your body's in this like, oh, so I'm being hurt somehow. What am I like? And it thinks that it's like some sort of thing and it's like bothering my immune system. But, so I'm going through a lot of stuff right now. And so that means like literally I'm crying at the drop of a fucking hat. Like, I maybe that's the COVID has something to do with that. So I'm crying a lot. I've been crying. I'm probably going to cry so much today. Get ready, listeners.
Oh, no. Well, that's okay. I mean, I'm glad you're here with us. And I'm sorry that you've been, going through that.
Well, I'm so excited to do this because I'm very excited for this interview, though. I have to say, I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I think it's a good time for me to come out as a water sign. So I
got that vibe.
And so this is a safe space for emotions.
Yeah.
Public crying is my love language. It's like, can we even be friends if you're not breaking down? No, absolutely not.
I'm a Cancer rising, and I can always tell a water sign from a mile away. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm really committed to ending all forms of inequality except for water sign supremacy. I just don't like people. I'm not gonna say what I want to say. I once had someone say to me, they were like, Alok, do you think that like people just don't experience emotions as intense as you? And I was so offended. It felt like a Stop Asian Hate moment. I was like, this is not okay. I actually do believe everyone is capable of experiencing the intensity of this feeling. They just stunt themselves from feeling it and they numb themselves. And we create a world that distances people from their own pain.
I totally believe that. I'm not going to say what I want to say about water signs because I'm a fire sign, and because I'm a Cancer rising, I feel like I get along with water signs very well, even though I'm not supposed to. But, I knew
Wait, so you're not going to say what you were going to say?
Well, I mean...
I'm like sitting here with bated breath. I'm like, oh, so you're just going to sit on this?
No, I was going to say, I think that what people say about water signs is unfair because I'm speaking as a member of the Cancer community. That's what I was going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
I didn't know. I didn't know that people were condescending towards water signs. I think
people are mean to water signs.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so I have like a cursory knowledge of astrology, and all I know is that people don't like Geminis. And
I do.
So
I'm a fire sign. I get along with yeah. Okay. Well, how about you, Brian? How are you feeling? Brian's an Aries, by the way, just FYI.
I'm an Aries. But I do have a lot of Aquarius in my chart. So I don't know what that says about me. But how am I feeling? I am feeling this past week I have been Kind of bummed because I've been experiencing a lot of what seems like career rejection, and in this field it happens a lot, but I don't know, it still doesn't get easier. I feel like I've been doing comedy for X amount of years now, and you'd think that it gets easier, but in fact, I feel like it's quite the opposite. But I think I'm in a good place about it right now. My interests primarily lie in acting and in writing, and my acting opportunities have somewhat dwindled and dissipated, but on the other side of that coin, I've been getting a lot more writing opportunities, and I think it's sort of making me reevaluate and question my talents, I guess, and who I am as an artist and what I am capable of. But yeah, it was a hard week because I had a particularly hard rejection to go through in terms of like my acting ability, and it sort of made me like question, like, am I even good at this at all? But lately I've just been busy writing a lot, and so I see it as a silver lining. So yeah, that's how I've been feeling, is good and bad.
Well, yeah, that's so hard. I mean, it's just like I think we've talked about this, but it's just a certain kind of jobs where I guess it's like all jobs to a certain extent, where you're looking for external validation, and it's like that sort of like balance of like believing in yourself but then also sort of needing this like approval of like a bigger like an outside influence is just so difficult, I think.
Right. But so much of it is it's like a top down thing. And I'm going to speak in theory, in like, let's say like, let's say I have a rep, like my rep is like, doesn't know. I feel like, my rep is just like a white person who just wants to make as much money off of me, yet they don't understand like the nuances of my writing, or like what I'm capable of, or like what my whole like comedy persona is about. And so let's say they'll like send me off to auditions for like the most random shit, like you gotta play an Italian mobster, and I'll go with my acting coach will be like, why did they send you for this? But then I still want to be a good client, so I'll fulfill the audition, but then I'll get a note of like, I don't know if you're like a great actor, you have a lot of work to do. And I'm just like, you don't even fucking know who I am. Like, how can you evaluate my performance based off of this? And I think there's just so many like gaps. I'm just frustrated with acting right now because so much of my success is reliant on the validation of this like other person, whereas with my writing, like I have creative autonomy over that, and I can control the narrative of that, and I feel more empowered doing it. So that's just kind of where I'm at. But yeah, it's very annoying.
I mean, I think I feel that with my writing all the time. I feel like the thing about this is what I always tell Brian. I think this is my like motivational talk that I always give Brian, is like, that's the reason why so many people don't follow their creative dreams, right? They're so scared that they're going to put something forward and someone's going to be like, yeah, that sucks. Your writing sucks. Your comedy sucks. Your acting sucks. And just the fact that you're facing that head on, that fucking makes you braver than like 99% of the people that never even put their shit out there because that's their fear, right? So I feel like if you do get that sort of negative feedback, be like, dude, I don't give a fuck. Like, this is what stops people from even trying. And here I am trying, and I don't give a shit about that. Like, I feel like that should empower you in a way.
Absolutely. But I mean, we're in good company.
Fuck those people.
Yeah, fuck them. We're in great company here. Because Alok, you're doing that on the daily. But how are you feeling?
I'm in the middle of touring right now, so I'm feeling like the extremities of like, why do I do this to my body? And this is precisely why I do this to my body. I think live art is the most beautiful thing in the world, and I've missed being able to do live shows with the pandemic more than anything. And I don't think I realized like how much of a hole there was in my heart until now. I'm seeing it and seeing like the kind of kinetic energy that gets created with a crowd, and how healing that is for me and how healing it is for them. And just being able to see people face to face and see how my work lands in people's lives, I think is really important and grounding for me.
That's so great. So how long were
love
you?
that.
How long were you like taking a break from live performance and comedy? I'm assuming because of the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Pandemic, I think my final gigs were like January or February 2020.
Wow.
And then I basically only really started picking up again in person in like April 2022.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So very recently.
Yeah.
Do you feel rusty at all?
No, I feel better. Yeah, I
Oh,
feel
that's great.
I feel like so much sharper. I think I also needed the break because I was
Mhm.
touring so hard before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right.
And nothing would have stopped me except like a global virus that like canceled all my gigs. So I had to like sit with myself. And I think really to what you were speaking to earlier before, Brian, it's about developing a self-concept outside of what other people think that you should be or are.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to distinguish your projection as not my reality nor my responsibility. And so what I was able to do, I think, during quarantine is to dream myself into existence, like develop a kind of self-intimacy to be like, who do I want to become? What part of me do I really want to flex out?
Right.
And what I really started to realize is I was like, I want to do more comedic work because right now in this climate of escalating anti-trans violence and discrimination, I actually want to say, you think that I'm funny based off of what I look like and absurd because of what I look like, but what about how you act like? And only comedy allows me to do that kind of inversion work. So I felt this kind of like political calling to show that, isn't it hilarious that they accuse us of making up genders when they're the ones making up political issues?
I mean, that's what I love. That's what I love about comedy personally for me. It's like this, like, just like the fucking absurdity of it all. Like, all these people pretending that this is our normal world and you're the weird one or whatever. And you're like, that is fucking absurd, you know?
Right, right. And so much of that, yeah, I mean, it's like the call is coming from inside the house a lot of the time. Like all of this anti-trans rhetoric is so much of it in the popular zeitgeist stems from comedians themselves, the biggest comedians of them all, and they're using their platforms to target the most marginalized communities. I've never really like it's so ridiculous to me. Like Dave Chappelle, I'm like, this is the hill you're gonna die on. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's very upsetting, and I think it's been kind of surprising to me because, you know, the more comedy I'm doing, people are saying things like, I didn't know you were a comedian. And I'm like, what do you think drag is? And then you begin to realize there's a kind of institutionalized homophobia and transphobia, which just sees drag as something that's like, oh, the queer people are doing this thing. They're just playing dress up. It's not serious. But the true comedians are people wearing ugly, basic T-shirts and like walking around with no aesthetics. Imagine trying to be funny in a 7-inch heel, okay? The type of talent that my community has is unparalleled. And actually, what so much of the tradition of drag is about a political comedy that actually satirizes, oh my gosh, you think that I'm this contrived, artificial creature. Look at how contrived and artificial your family connections are.
Yeah. It's like this making, it's like a mockery of that. Do you know what I mean? And they're putting on this character, and the people that are like these stand-up comedians, I'm the serious like stand-up comedian. They don't even understand that them wearing like a loose shirt and like cargo pants and a stupid like baseball cap, that's a fucking
it's
that's
an
drag.
aesthetic.
It's like
it's
they're
a choice.
yeah, they're doing a character too, but they're too like they're like one level like too not deep to get that. Whereas in drag, performers completely understand that.
Wow. That is my mind is breaking open right now, because like just hearing you put that into words, like immediately I'm making all these connections to, there's just so many hypocrisies that exist like in this space where it extends beyond just comedians, where I'll even use like people like Jordan Peterson, for example, or like any of those like associated YouTube like aggro man sort of brands. I'm like, what, like how you conduct yourself in real life is completely antithetical to what you're preaching and who you're like, targeting your hate towards. And it's, gosh, there's like so many hypocrisies that exist.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And they can't even see it.
They can't. But that's why we need what I'm finding is that comedy as a medium is the only way to get people to see it. Like if I was to argue with people, if I was to like write an essay, all of those things will not reach. But comedy reaches.
That's so smart.
And I think this is why I feel really emboldened to bring comedy to people who've historically been ridiculed. Because I think what's been really cool about my shows is I have queer people come up to me and say, this is the first comedy show I've ever been to. I don't usually go to these because I'm usually sitting there scared that I'm going to be the butt of someone's joke.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that I feel comfortable being able to laugh. And this was so healing for me. And I really needed this because I'm having a super hard week. And I'm like, exactly. We can't allow them to own comedy because comedy is necessary for our survival. By which I'm saying being flippant and superfluous and absurd is necessary for our survival. It's like the only way that we can persist through these incredibly apocalyptic and bleak times is by being able to find levity and joy alongside it.
And I would argue that was the origins of comedy in our society, in everyone's society. It's always been this thing where it's like a subversive tool, because when people are oppressed and there is no escape from oppression, that's like the beginning, like even ancient comedy, like traditions, like even in Korea, like where Brian and I are from, are like the most classic comedy is like making fun of the wealthy landowner that fucking abuses everybody because he's an idiot. And like that's the only way you can call him an idiot when you're doing like a little comedy act, because you can't go up to him and say you're a fucking idiot and you like torture and kill everybody all the time, because then you'll get murdered, right? So I think that's the origins of comedy. And I think it's weird how these present day comedians like that are very powerful, like Dave Chappelle and all those people, are like taking that and wearing that as their like little cape. And I'm like, the oppression cape or something. And then they're like making it so confusing because they're like, no, we're the oppressed. And it's like, what's going on here?
That's every oppressor sees himself as a victim.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that's how it's always worked, is people identify as canceled as a way to rally their bases, as a way to make more money. There's a kind of purchase that comes from, look at me, I'm being marginalized.
Right.
But what's happening in contemporary political culture is people's oppressors' discomfort is seen as tantamount and equivalent to like the material oppression of trans people. So like I do this joke on stage where I say, I believe empathy is a two-way street. I know I need to have compassion for my cis brothers and sisters. That's why every morning during my sun salutation, I take a 15-second breath to reflect on how difficult it must be for cis people to use they, them pronouns. And I'm trying to show people how that's what they're upset about.
It's so hard for you.
Meanwhile, every 32 hours a trans person is killed on this earth.
Seriously.
And that's a conservative estimate because when we're brutalized and murdered, we're misgendered when we die. So we don't actually even have the data to account for what is an ongoing attempted project of genocide.
Yeah.
So what comedy actually allows me to do is to show your discomfort is not at all equivalent to what I'm doing, what the kind of lives that we're living.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of financial purchase to posturing oneself as a victim through being uncomfortable.
Well, like Ricky Gervais, you think he's ever even had the fucking thought of being, I can't go to a comedy show because I'm afraid? Has that thought ever fucking crossed his mind? But no, he's somehow the biggest victim out of anyone else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so
Such
ridiculous.
A great point, though. Because all of those white comedians, they're manifesting these like made up conflicts, and currently now it's like the woke mob, this cancel culture, and they're just like they're just, I don't know, I hate it so much.
Let's just be really clear, we had a Capitol insurrection riot. That is an actual mob.
Right.
There's no woke mob, right? But this is the power of language. And this is why we have to be involved in the project of language and meaning making, is that people are more afraid of Antifa than they are a wildfire. How did that come to be? Is through discourse. It's through storytelling. There's stories that are told about trans people that are fundamentally wrong. And as a comedian, I'm able to show those scripts as being wrong and then show the scripts that get invisibilized as reality. What I see comedy is about organizing what we think of as absurd and what we think of as reality and inverting that.
I love that. I have to just say one thing. I think that right now, I think why there's so many cis people that are like obsessed with harming the trans community, I think there's like a big pushback because I feel like there was this push to stop bigotry against trans people that was like wonderful and beautiful. Like in the last, like I would even say it was very short-lived. It was like 5 years, and it was progressing so rapidly in a great way. And then there was like this shitty pushback of this like, no, do you know what I mean? And it makes me so fucking sad because it's like one of these things where I'm like, I mean, I remember all my life, trans people were always the butt of the joke on TV every fucking night, you know, every fucking late night show episode. And I saw this like recently in the last like very small amount of time, like 5 years, I was like, finally, this is going to end. And wow, I see the light of the end of the tunnel, I think. And then there was like this heavy fucking hammer, like, fuck no, you know, that's like really upsetting.
Well, to like live model wearing many hats and put on my academic hat for a second.
Yeah.
Like ridiculing trans people is not just about trans people. It's about policing all people into gender norms. Wow. It's a PR campaign that says, if you depart from traditional man or woman, we're going to make fun of you and make your life miserable, like what we're doing to Alok. And so that's what makes me so annoyed when people frame trans issues as a minority struggle. Right. Because it's actually, there's a reason why anti-abortion laws are at the exact same time as anti-trans laws. They're both about policing women into reproducing agent. And if you have any other ambitions, desires, dreams, entanglements, that has to be nullified and eliminated. And so what I'm trying to get people to understand is that trans people are blowing a whistle saying this is going to affect all of y'all too. Right. Like all of y'all are being policed into these old school Victorian era white gender norms. Right, and people are more concerned about men in dresses than they are about global economic collapse. That's an orchestrated and coordinated strategy.
That is so like, brilliant. So I love that. Brilliant. It's like all of our issue. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's not localized. It's like affecting all of us. Wow.
Wow.
You know, this is look. We want to. We had some questions here, but like, this has just been such a great discussion, and I guess what we want to know is like, what are your earliest and most formidable memories of how masculinity versus femininity is established in Punjabi and Malayali cultures?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up with men in skirts, and they're called lungis or dhotis. And some of the most masculine men I knew would tie up their skirt like a mini skirt and walk around. So it just really irritates me because so much of our gender norms are white gender norms. And I think especially as Asians and Asian Americans, we need to be leading that conversation to actually be like, where we're from, there's a totally different aesthetic sensibility and definition of what gender is. Where like beauty culture isn't gendered in the same ways. Adornment culture isn't gendered in the same ways. I grew up with men wearing flamboyant colors and jewelry and mirrors and practicing adornment and going to a salon, and these things weren't seen as feminine. That's not to say that there wasn't misogyny and sexism, but when people say to me that I'm gender nonconforming, I say from a white lens. In my own culture, I'm not gender nonconforming, I'm brown. So when you're saying that body hair isn't feminine, you mean from a white lens, because I grew up with hairy women all the time, and that didn't disqualify their femininity or their womanhood. That's only a white beauty aesthetic that now has become internalized by many people through legacies of conquest, right? So I think for me, it's weird because I grew up in a house where I was actually completely accepted for my gender nonconformity. And that was by virtue of my family being Indian and understanding and acknowledging the sacred roles historically that trans and gender diverse people played within our cultures. I grew up not even needing a word to describe what I was because people already kind of knew what I was. When I go back to India with my nose ring, people know what I'm doing and what I'm giving.
Right.
There's not this same sense of like third gender people know, they may not like us, but they know that we exist.
Right.
Whereas in the West, we have to continually be like, hey, everyone, we're real. But in South Asia, people are like, of course you're real. I mean, there's like thousands of years of documented history and organizing from you people. Here we go. So I think what really frustrates me in the conversation around trans and non-binary rights in this country is people say that this shit is new or that like non-binary is a new millennial trend or fad. And I'm like, we've literally been here in POC cultures for hundreds of years.
And I feel like there's also this belief among white people that they're the progressive ones, that they're bringing this idea to us. That is what fucking gets my goat. They're like, oh, you know, like this is a thing from our civilization to your people. Like it's just like, I don't know. That's the vibe I'm catching.
No, it's true.
Right?
But and you grew up in Texas, right, Alok?
Right.
Wow. Yeah, that must have been... Because it's like you exist in the extremes. Like I feel like in Texas, more so than any place in America, people would identify you as you're so gender non-conforming, yet you come from this culture where it's just is. It's not this... It's not this like ascribed label, like this label that you're ascribing to me.
It was a trip. I like to describe it as like homo on the range, you know? It was like it was a lot of stuff was happening, but I now am so deeply in love with the fact that I'm a Texan. And I make sure every time I'm touring to do shows in Texas. And I actually put together, at 50 years after the Stonewall riots in 2019, I put together a pride party in my hometown in small town Texas. And I performed and I brought drag queens from across Texas, and we made it for a minute a little queer utopia. And I really believe that the future of the queer movement is in the South. Because actually what most people don't know is the highest number of LGBTQ people living in the United States live in the American South.
Wow.
And the reason they don't know that is because the only representation we have in media of LGBTQ people are white urban elites on the West and East Coast.
Problematic.
Where actually, like, if you go to places like Dallas and Atlanta, there's so many black and brown, queer and trans people everywhere. Like, you'll literally just be pulling up in a car being like, oh my God, hey, like, you see us everywhere. Right. And so what I really want to challenge in my work is, like, sometimes I go on stage with a Texan accent.
Yeah.
I say, hey, everyone, howdy, my name's Alok. I'm a non-binary trans fan from College Station, Texas. I'm really trying to challenge people's ideas and imaginations, not just of gender, but also what it means to be Texan and from the South. Because actually the South is just a minority of rich white conservatives occupying a majority black and brown queer space.
Yeah.
So we can't concede that ground, right?
And it's like a lot of the like sort of bias that these like liberal coastal elite white people have about the South are against the like conservative white people that are occupying the South, like how you said. And it's like they're acting like, and it's kind of like when I hear liberal white people talking about how the South is so racist and conservative, I'm like, you're just thinking about the white people that live there, and that is racist. You know, it's like
you're literally erasing an entire population of people.
Like, it's like, well, those other people, oh, that's not the South. And I'm like, that is the South. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And what a great. I mean, I just love all of this. It's so great. I'm so happy that you know you exist and your work exists, because it's just, I feel like such important work and the work that needs to be done right now.
I'm just grateful to exist in this time, you know, because I just feel like, and I'm really feeling this being on tour, there's so much support. It can feel easy to just focus on like all of the discrimination and the violence and the bad comedy, but alongside it, there's like so much love and so much support. Right. And people are taking sanctuary very seriously. Like, how do I become a sanctuary for refugees, for Asian Americans who are afraid of taking the subway, for trans people who are getting harassed every day? And I feel that's what really grounds me and keeps me keep going, is like the deep love that our communities show for each other, amidst all of this despair, the ways in which, like, when I was speaking at a rally at the governor's mansion in Austin a few weeks ago, a young trans kid came up to me with a wand that he had painted in the colors of the trans flag.
Yeah.
And he said that he gets bullied at school, so he pretends that he's a wizard to keep the bullies away. And he knew that I got bullied too, so he gifted me his wand. And I was like, oh my God, like, the narrative out there is that trans kids are these hapless victims being oppressed, but also trans kids are so powerful too.
So powerful.
And
so
so loving and so protective of all of us.
It's like so touching.
Oh.
I feel like I know what you mean. It's like that's also been very moving to me. It's like, yeah, it is like the hardest time, but it's also like the best time, because like that the shitty stuff has, you know, really made everyone else vocal about their support and love and like community, and that's like, it is very moving. Oh, that's
like I was seeing self-defense workshops with like Asian cis women and trans and gender non-conforming people coming together to talk about like how to be in public in New York and fearing street harassment and violence. Like, I hate that it takes this level of atrocity to make that happen, but the fact that that's happening is so beautiful to me, and it's the kind of connection and solidarity that I have wanted for so desperately in my life.
It reminds me of that meme. Have you ever seen that meme? And there's like a puppy, and it's standing in front of a little kitten, and it's like, you have to come through me first, and it's so heartbreaking, because it's like, here we are, you know, people that are like marginalized and going through a lot of pain, but like we're like standing up for each other, and it's so, that Juan story is so moving. Wow.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Well, look, we're gonna shift gears slightly. You know, we wanted to ask, because we love your approach to fashion, which is, you know, just to wake up, ask yourself how you feel, and dress how you feel. And we're wondering, can you give us some tips on connecting fashion and beauty to our extreme range of feelings?
Yeah, my tip is dress like you did when you were younger, because actually kids are right. They just say, I don't want to wear this, I do want to wear this. I like this, I don't like this. And they're not concerned about, is this for boys, is this for girls? What are people going to think about me? Do these things match? Am I allowed to wear this color at this time of day? It's genuinely like an immediate reaction of, this is what I need. Yeah. And plot twist, we're still that kid, actually. It's just now we have all this social judgment and pressure about, like, what are people going to think about me? And so actually, if people got dressed for themselves, not to placate other people's discomfort, we would live in a gendered free fashion world. Because I see men in Manhattan wearing suits when it's 110 degrees outside. I'm like, what are you doing? Put on a freaking skirt. This is so absurd.
Damn.
Yeah, free yourself.
Fuck. I'm a perpetrator of this.
Exactly. I think every man should be asking themselves in the summer, why am I wearing pants?
I literally just bought a pair of brown leather shoes, and I'm like, the child in me would have hated this, and I bought them.
Dragged you.
And I bought them solely because I'm like, well, I'm an adult, and I'm a man, so I should be wearing brown leather shoes. Fuck.
Free yourself, Brian. Free yourself from the confines of heteronormative shoes.
Yes.
The child in me is so upset at me. I love that, though. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Like, even when I shop and, like, you know, choose clothes and style for myself, I've totally become disconnected with my sense of play. And it's, if I really sit and think about it, it's more of like,
how can you be a comedian disconnected from your sense of play? Like, isn't our role as comedians to be ambassadors for play?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's the joke when most male comedians are on stage in a baggy t-shirt. I'm like,
exactly.
So you're going to tell me
restricting
you could be creative in all realms except in your own personal appearance? Like, wow, okay.
Yeah, they're so restrictive in the style of dress, because it's like, it's a confine. It's like, if I don't dress like a fucking sleazebag comedian guy, whatever that means in my head, my bros are not going to take me seriously or something.
It's actually, you're dressing for your bros. Let's be very clear. There's a kind of thing going on there.
Oh,
there is a thing for the male gaze. You're not the male gaze, the male gaze.
I'm getting jacked and getting a six-pack for my bros.
Right.
For the bros.
Because that's 100% what's happening.
Seriously.
I mean, oftentimes, like, when I'm going to the gym and working out, and that's very infrequent, but most of the times I'm like, I'm just checking out other men, and it's just us being like, nice delts, bro. And like,
Nice
it's
delts.
no one's like talking about it, but it's purely for the male gaze. Oh man, but I love that. But Alok, we also want to know your thoughts on aging too, because given how much of beauty and fashion culture is to make people feel anxious about growing old, and skincare and beauty, and especially like Korean beauty, it's marketed with this message of stay young forever. How do we move away from that? And what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I'm at this place in my life now where I'm not trying to convince people to be free. They have to make that choice themselves. What I'm trying to do is to live my life so rambunctiously and flamboyantly that I show people that they're wrong. I don't need to convince them. And so I'm just going to age and still be glamorous and fashionable everywhere I go. Like, I'm so excited for my style iterations in the future. I hope that when I'm like 70, I'm wearing saris and platform sneakers every day. And maybe like huge shoulder pad cardigans on top of my saris. Like, I think that there's ways in which I'll adapt, but I'm still always going to be serving a look. And I love fashionable old people who are constantly saying like, I don't have to compromise my style or my sensuality for other people's comfort.
Yeah.
I just think genuinely subversion begins within. It actually, we have to go internal in order for us to go external. And I think so often people are so convinced with what other people care about them or think about them, but why would I want people who would spend time being mean in a comment section versus playing Mario Kart? Why would I elevate their opinion about my body as real? Like, what kind of choices are you making with your life? Yeah. Okay, you literally think water is seasoning, and you like I don't need your criteria and your taste palette will never be able to decipher my glamour. So I'd rather just develop a self-image, and I think that's actually what threatens people so much about trans and gender nonconforming people like me, is that we have a strong self-image where people see us and say, oh my God, like, how do you must get harassed so much. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And what? You must hate yourself. How does that feel?
Yeah. The fact that they're not fucking getting to you is fucking getting to them. For sure. Yeah, I love that. Like, God, I forgot what it said. Like, why would you, about like internet trolls? I remember I read this thing once. It was like, why would you let somebody that in real life you would not even give the time of day get to, like, if I saw this like fucking nerd in real life, I say nerd lovingly. Like, if I saw this troll in real life, I'd be like, I don't care what you have to say about me. I'm not gonna listen. Like, why would I let that guy bother me?
Yeah, I think it's such a great point that you just brought up here. Is that these transphobic comments and criticisms? It's often on the guise of like, well, choose a side. Like, you can't, like, which one is it? Is it, where do you lie on this binary? But the truth of the matter is, it's like it takes the most self-belief and the most self-conceptualization and the most confidence, and that's like completely opposite to what these people who feel insecure and like are projecting their hate onto.
I mean, every hate comment is just an ask for help. Truly.
Yep.
And
it's a projection.
That's why I'm sending love and light to these girls. Like, I can't even imagine what it must be like to like hate yourself that much. I'm just really committed to being happy and having a good time. And that's taken me a long time to get here, right? Like, I used to indulge all of it. Like, I wanted to clap back. I wanted to justify myself. No, I'm great. And then I realized I cannot reason with someone who is committed to their pain as an identity, to their grief as a personality, and to their suffering as a virtue. This would require them to rewrite their entire self-narrative. That's not going to be able to happen from me. But what I can do is invest all the energy I was trying to convince other people that I was great, that I'm legitimate, that I'm a good person, into living my best life.
Right.
Yep.
I hate to be that girl boy, but I have to head out.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And I'm because this is a podcast about Asian feeling, I want to say that I'm feeling sad about time, which is an oppressive structure that is preventing us from so much meaning and connection together. And it's been so wonderful to connect with you both.
Oh, it was so nice to talk to you. That was such a great conversation, and thank you so much for doing it again.
Of course.
All right, listeners, sorry for the abrupt end, but unfortunately, Alok's schedule is so crazy for good reason, because they're just booked and busy, and they had a hard out, and we just got so invested in all the things they had to say that we couldn't get to the rest of the questions. But
well, so I guess we can, like, that was a very intense conversation.
Right.
And then I feel like it touched on a lot of topics that are topical today.
Yeah.
And that we have never really discussed on this podcast. How are you feeling about the discussion, Brian?
I thought it was fantastic. I feel very fortunate to have had a conversation with Alok, because I think they do that so well, is to like really explain these nuanced concepts, especially in regards to gender nonconformity, in a like really easy to digest way, where for someone like me, like, I may have certain gaps in my knowledge, but I'm keeping an open mind, and overall I've just, like, everything they said just was like, wow. I was just nodding my head vigorously.
Yeah.
And they're feelings that I have possessed, but to hear them put it into words was, like, very illuminating.
Yeah, I love it when I talk to somebody like that and they are so smart that, like, it feels like it's like feeding my brain or something. Do you know what I mean? When you speak to somebody that's like very smart about a certain topic, and you're like, oh yeah, like I can feel myself learning.
Yeah,
it was like,
but and like I really appreciated the Inside Baseball, like, comedy conversation, because it is a thing that I talk about, especially amongst, like, other POC comedians, is that you have these white established comedians who like oftentimes, like, do their thing on YouTube, and comedy comes from a position of being oppressed. Like, you cannot be the oppressor and also be a comedian and endear yourself to an audience, because so much of humor comes from, as we discussed earlier, like, this fissure, this like challenge or this difficulty. And it's a twofold thing. You want to make light of it, but you also process the information and turn it into a joke, and it helps you remind yourself that it'll be okay. But with these white comedians, so much of the comedy is centered around this quote unquote woke mob. Like, comedy is so, like, tarnished and ruined now. There's this woke mob, and it's like the most cowardly thing to me, because it's a non-existent enemy. But I think that sort of dialogue, it's being prolonged, and it has no signs of going away, because, like we said, you're fighting with your imagination. So there is no, like, entity. There's no, like, woke mob that's out to get me. As we've seen already, like, people who've been quote unquote canceled, no one's truly been canceled. People, like, forget the media cycle. Like, so what is this? What is this woke mob?
For me, it's almost like pathological. It's like they see an oppressed group, and then they wear the face of that group as their own. They're, like, mimicking them, and the people that are, like, the weird thing is, like, the mass population, the people that feel the same way, like, feel oppressed and victimized, are now following these leaders who are not oppressed, because they're wearing the skin of the people that are oppressed. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and they're like, I'm a sheep too, guys, I'm a sheep too. And all these other sheep are like, oh, he's a sheep too. And then but it's like this bizarre, like, manipulative thing that a lot of people that are not oppressed and have a lot of power do, and it's really it's very uncomfortable for me when I see that. Like, it's like the whole Trump thing. Trump is always like, I'm so oppressed, I'm the biggest victim, and I think he deeply believes that, and I'm like, what is going on psychologically? It's really disturbing, just like that example that we said in the episode. Like, trans people, queer people feel scared to go to comedy shows, and we all can see why. We all know why. We know why, because we've seen them in public before being attacked.
Right.
And the fact that Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais are gonna act like they are more oppressed than those people. What? What? Like, every time Ricky Gervais goes into a public space, people are like, oh, here's a free meal. Oh, you get to sit down first. Oh my God. Like, that's his experience in life versus a trans person who's fearing for their lives everywhere they go. It blows my fucking mind, Brian. It's like mind blowing.
Yeah, but overall, I loved Alok. It's such a lovely conversation. I think one of my other big takeaways is just
great.
Leaning into our senses of play. I think.
Oh yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm insecure. I'm anxious. I think a lot about how others perceive me, and so much of that is just tied to societal expectations, and even as something as like obvious as just clothing choices or things that seem so innocuous and not low impact. I'm like, how much of this am I doing? Right. I'm like, how much of this is me doing this because I sincerely like it, or if it's just because I'm of a certain age and I have a certain job and I want to be a part of a certain group, and this is just what's going down,
But I have to say, I'm glad, I have to say there's a balance there, because like, I think this is like part of the larger discussion that we have being from an Asian culture, where we're like, oh, we have to tap into doing things for ourselves more. But there is obviously, there is a little bit of like, I mean, this is like, I guess not really when it comes to fashion or little joys that you give yourself in life, but like. For sure. Maybe this isn't actually true, because I was like, I don't actually give a fuck about anybody when it comes to my fashion, and I'm gonna and I want to tap even deeply more into that. I don't want to think about the society as a whole at all. Not in this like in other areas, yes, but not in this area, in this area. I think we should have total complete freedom as adults, yeah
Gosh, I think I felt like I got roasted to oblivion when Alok was like, well, how could you play, like, how could you not be a part into your sense of play but call yourself and be a comedian and be so and like, I have literally thought to myself about my like self-conceptualization of like, what is my comedy brand, and I'm like, maybe I'm like a serious guy but is also like dryly very funny. And I'm like, wow, I even use the adjective serious to describe myself as a comedian.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't, it's a nuance. Well, modern comedy is so like, there's so many different types, and there's so many things that go on in people's heads for it. So it's like, I mean, I definitely tap into this. I've like fallen victim to this idea of like, I think that like American comedy or like white people comedy is, there's a sense of you have to be smart enough to write a smart joke, and that's a very serious thing, right? Versus other types of comedy in the world where it's just a silly thing where you're just trying to get people to laugh. But there is definitely like a feeling of seriousness with comedy, modern comedy. So I don't think like, I understand where you're coming from too.
Totally. Well, I don't know.
Anyway.
Youngmi, is there anything else? Is there anything else we should touch on? How do we want to end this episode?
I'm gonna end it by saying I look forward to Brian dressing more. Maybe next time he's on here, he's gonna have purple hair this time. And maybe he'll be wearing a see-through rainbow shirt next time.
Maybe I gotta make an appointment with Chan and get my hair bleached.
Just maybe do something for you. Just be goofy and silly. Maybe you get the acrylic nails, and we'll see. Gender non-conforming Brian. I'm excited for this new gender non-conforming Brian.
I'm gonna come next time I record. I'm wearing a full-on 3-piece suit. gone in the opposite or doubled down in the opposite direction.
But that's drag too. That's the whole thing. A man dressing like a man is drag. Like that's somebody told you that is what a man is supposed to look like, and you're performing that. That's like, that's the whole thing. I feel like that's the whole thing. Anyway, I guess that was it. That was beautiful.
Youngmi's sense of play is wearing
I'm gonna be wearing the suit.
A power suit.
I'm gonna be wearing the suit. I'm gonna be drag. I'm gonna dress in drag. I think obviously we didn't get to talk to Alok about this, but the realization I had recently that my friend told me who was trans, she was like, "Well, all of it is a performance, right? Like we think that we're born thinking that men look like this and women look like that, but it's not at all. And it's like none of us knew what we were supposed to dress like. Somebody taught us that, and so." Yeah, it's like we're all in drag is I think the takeaway here. It's all a performance.
That'll be the title.
Yeah.
It's all a performance. Yeah, but listeners, if you made it this far, thank you for supporting the podcast, and we're equally bummed that Alok had to they're busy. They're booked and busy. So if you want to find Alok online and learn more about their work, they're a great follow. Absolutely, highly recommend. You can find them on Instagram at Alok V Menon. That is ALOKVMENON. And what about you, Youngmi?
Oh, me, you can find at YM Mayor or Youngmi Mayor on TikTok. How about you, Brian?
You guys can find me on socials at It's Brian Park. And everyone, be sure to follow our podcast on socials at Feeling Asian Podcast. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/feelingasian. And I think that's it. We'll see you here again next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.